Hi, my name is Tim Hopkins, and I'm a senior consultant with McKinley Advisors, a strategic consulting firm that specializes in strategy, research, analytics, and marketing. Throughout the last 16 years or so, I've had the great pleasure of working with some of the most passionate, member-driven organizations in the world. None of them are perfect when it comes to embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion into every aspect of what they do. However, the ones who have made the most meaningful progress do have a few things in common. And I'd like to share that with you. So a few of the things I'm going to share today include best practices on how to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into your organization-wide strategy, and tips on how to set clear objectives and key results to help make meaningful progress on your DEI efforts. So starting out, one of the first tips in building diversity, equity, and inclusion into your organization-wide strategy is to set a clear vision on what your organization wants to be. As leaders of mission-driven organizations, the vision that we set helps rally members and supporters behind the work we do and keep them engaged, has them showing up, volunteering, attending and speaking at conferences, paying dues, and so on. By setting a clear vision that includes how diversity, equity, and inclusion help your organization achieve its mission, you're laying an important foundation for the work ahead. Another important best practice is to add a clear focus for DEI in the organization-wide strategic plan with dedicated resources to enable true success. Much like any other strategic initiative in your organization that's really important, being included as a key pillar of the strategic plan is one of the surest ways to garner the focus and support needed to make meaningful progress on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Another important element is acknowledging that each of us in our organizations all have biases, conscious and unconscious, and there's a great need to examine organizational systems to address and root out as much bias as possible. This includes systemic processes like board and volunteer nominations, speaker and award selections, different areas of governance, and so on. These processes have kept many organizations from truly being diverse, equitable, and inclusive, and are a great place to start to make powerful, important change. And lastly, just like every other important element of your organization-wide strategy, it's important to set clear, measurable goals on what success looks like and do everything in your power to set up the organization for success. So I want to dive into that a little bit further. On how one might build diversity, equity, and inclusion into the org strategy with some of the measurable goals that we're going to discuss here. So clear measurements of diversity, equity, and inclusion success. First is one of my favorite topics. It's outcomes over outputs. The difference between the two of these is really important. Outputs measure activity-based results, and outcomes measure value-based results. Another great way of differentiating between the two terms is an output is something you do, and an outcome is something that happens as a consequence of something you do. For example, create a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force is a common output organizations have done over the years to bring a more concentrated effort to their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. While it is an important step for an organization to take, an outcome measures something different, perhaps that a task force might achieve. For example, elimination of bias from leadership nomination processes is an outcome that an organization would hope to achieve. They would probably use that diversity, equity, and inclusion task force, the board, or other groups to help review the systems in place, draft revisions, get approval on the revised processes, and so on. But the important part is to focus on the change itself and not just activities. Another important aspect is the collection of both quantitative and qualitative measurements. An important quantitative measure might be setting a goal that 30% of all volunteer and board leadership positions be held by women and underrepresented groups. This is a common one we see across organizations to ensure levels of diversity across what organizations, communities, to look more like the communities they serve. However, organizations must go beyond that, include qualitative measures as well. That might include whether those underrepresented leaders feel included and welcome to contribute in leadership discussions. It's important to both include quantitative and qualitative measures to ensure you get the full picture and that to see different ways that DEI is and could be measured within the strategy that you have in place, and not just stop those measurements at a surface level. Next, it is important that organizations make it an overall commitment to the collection of and analysis of meaningful data that demonstrates progress against DEI objectives. Collecting diversity, equity, and inclusion data is not an easy job. In order to do so well, an organization needs to establish foundational elements to ensure the data is safe, secure, and that members and customers know exactly how you use that information before they're willing to share it with you. I've seen some organizations fall short of this commitment and find themselves not making the progress they set out to achieve when establishing their org level strategy. But I encourage you to make this commitment because it is a very important step that should not be taken lightly on your DEI journey. So to close, I want to end with this quote, one of my favorites that I heard growing up. Don't just talk about it, be about it. While it's extremely important to have regular, meaningful conversations at the leadership level to explore the organization's diversity, equity, inclusion journey, it cannot end there. Action must follow those words, and mapping the next steps on your journey, those important path ahead, including how the organization will make meaningful commitments and investments to fully support its journey to become truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive, is such a vital aspect of this entire process. I wish you the best of luck along this important journey. Thank you so much for your time. Take care.